This lecture is going to be about Irish immigrants who were ultimately exiled from their own country and came to America as, in some ways, refugees from the plight of starvation. So we're going to look at the overall idea of immigrants coming to America through their experience. First of all, we have to understand what some of these definitions mean so that we can speak correctly about what immigration is. So first of all, migrate without the E or the I. Migrate alone means that there's a lack of permanent settlement, that someone is sort of fluidly moving very frequently and never really settling in one place. A lot of times it's a result of a seasonal or periodic movement. It can be oftentimes to move with the crop seasons to help harvest different crops at different times of years. Emigrate and immigrate imply a permanent move, as opposed to migration, which is sort of continual movement, and it generally means across a political boundary of some kind. And the difference is that emigrate with an E describes the move in relation to the point of departure. So you would say a person emigrated from England to America, or emigrated from Ireland to America. Now, immigrate with an I describes the move relative to the destination. So you would say an Irish immigrant in America. So you're relating the move to the destination or the American landscape. So it can be a little bit tricky, but be careful about how you use the words immigrate and emigrate correctly. So what I typically ask students to do is to describe often held perspectives of immigrant communities. And I usually ask students to think of at least 3 different nationalities or ethnicities that have immigrated to the United States. And start to wonder and sort of have a conversation about how you think these perspectives are often either negative or positive in American discourse, and to explain why. So keep these things in mind as you're reading through the material these weeks. Irish immigration was very contentious in America. You wouldn't think so, but there were a lot of images that sort of described Irish people and Irish immigrants as unassimilable, people who were different and other and did not want to completely assimilate themselves into American life. So look at these 2 images. On one side you've got Harper's Weekly, and on the other side another image of the Citizenship Bowl. So let's look at the one on the left first. You've got 2 people groups being compared here. Which are they? Obviously black and white, and you've got the South and the North. So a lot of this image is drawing comparisons between these 2 groups of people because they're being balanced out on a scale almost equally. And it says the ignorant vote, honors are easy. So what this particular image is describing is how each of these people groups would vote in the post-Civil War era, and that they were both sort of similar in their kind of brutish characteristics and their simplicity of mind. So in a lot of ways, new Irish immigrants were being on par compared with the African American newly freed community. On the other side, you see Lady Liberty. She's draped in an American flag, and she's sort of trying to stir up the pot of citizenship. Now, what you see she's using is the spoon of equal rights. So all new peoples, all new immigrants to the United States should have equal rights of citizenship. So you see different nationalities and types of people in the cup, but there's one person who's standing up and holding a flag and a knife, and seems to be not mixing well into this bowl of citizenship. And the accompanying text says, the mortar of assimilation and the one element that won't mix. Irish nationalists seem to be unwilling to take on the same kind of citizenship that other nationalities were willing to do. So what makes the Irish different from the other 2 ethnicities that we've already studied so far, Native Americans and African Americans? I want you to think about that, but to realize that one of the major differences here is the fact that they are voluntary immigrants, whereas Native Americans were native to America and African Americans were by and large brought forcefully against their will to America. In this case, Irish people were coming over to America mostly of their own desire. So we have to look at what motivates immigration. There's two ways to look at this, a push factor and a pull factor. So when we talk about push factors, we're looking at a force which acts to drive people away from a place, usually their place of origin or where they were born. And the pull factor is benefits of the destination that draw a person to that location. So in the case of Irish immigration, push factors would be what negative circumstances in Ireland were pushing them out of their home country and toward America. And the pull factor would be benefits in America that were drawing them to America in particular and not some other country around the world. Irish immigration push and pull factors are a little more specific than just that generalization, so let's look at a few. Irish oppression in Great Britain. The British people had already colonized Ireland and had been buying up all kinds of land. And what they would do under English tyranny is that they would sort of buy out all the existing land and then rent the land to poor Irish inhabitants. And then if the English decided that they no longer wanted to farm on that land, but put it out to graze, to have sheep, which was more profitable and easier on labor, they could fire all of their laborers they needed for more intensive crops like potatoes, and they could push the people off the land as much as they wanted to. So there was this extreme Irish poverty that resulted from their inability to own their own land and work their own land. To top that off, in 1845, there was an extreme potato famine. Potato was the primary crop in Ireland, and it really consisted the bulk of the diet of many poor Irish families. And when a fungus came and actually devastated all of the potato crops in Ireland in that year, 2 million people, 1 million people died, and another 1 million people ended up leaving Ireland. So a total of 2 million people were lost from the Irish countryside. All of those negative circumstances were pushing the Irish to go somewhere else, to find opportunity to own land like they could in America. Particularly after the Civil War, there was land that was opening up under the Homestead Act in the West, and that was a great draw. There was also greater earning potential for many Irish men and women that could go into factories, or they could help to build some of the railroads like the Transcontinental Railroad, which was being built in the 1860s. There was an advantage to the common language spoken by Irish people. Although the Irish do have their own language, once they had been colonized by the English language had by and large taken over. And so they did have a lot of similarities in their language and their culture, and in fact even their skin color, which would help to ease their assimilation, although they would come to find that it wouldn't be quite as easy as they had hoped. Altogether, 3 million Irish people came to America between 1855 and 1920. This is the largest immigrant group that came to America in that time period. As I mentioned, the potato famine really did necessitate immigration to America. Here you can see some drawings and depictions of what it was like for these people. Peasant farmers really lost their land to a lot of English enclosures, as I mentioned before, trading off farming for grazing. And the poor were dying of starvation. The fungus attacked all the potato crops, killed 40% of all of those crops that year, while landlords continued to export foodstuffs to different countries. For example, the wheat that was produced in Ireland was being sold to England and other countries. And by 1855, as I mentioned, 1 million people had died. The Irish found no other alternative really at this point than to cross the Atlantic. Here you can see a depiction of the Irish population in America as it rose and rose, and clearly you can see that in 1845 there was a drastic increase in the number of people leaving Ireland to come to America. Here also you can see how Irish people were perceived by the British, the English, and the Americans in these two drawings. On the left-hand side you can see the depiction of an English lady, Florence Nightingale, who was sort of a heroine of a nurse in the Crimean War. And then on the other side you can see a sort of characterization of a general Irish woman who they called Bridget McBruiser. And you can see that there are physical characteristics, racial physical characteristics, that are differentiating and separating these two people groups. They even pull a quote from Shakespeare to explain the contrasted faces, saying, look on this picture and then on that, that they clearly are not the same type of person. On the other side, you have another racial designation of how each people group looks physically different. In the middle, you have the Anglo-Teutonic or Caucasian. On the right-hand side, the Negro or African. And on the left-hand side, the Irish Iberian. Now, Iberian refers to the Iberian Peninsula, so they're lumping in also Spanish and Portuguese people with the Irish. And you can see the even similarities between the far left, Irish Iberian, and the far right, Negro physical characteristics. So again, there are similarities being drawn between these people groups. Here you can see some early stereotypes of the Irish as they came to America. Very early on, based on English perspectives, they were seen as brutish, as pagan savages, as the missing link even, and as papists, because most Irish were Catholic, whereas the British were Protestant. Now, later views, by the time they come to America, also begin to include a lack of self-control and temper, hot temper, alcoholism, laziness, and gambling. Here you can see a fear about the voting rights of black people versus white people, and which one was really worse. The caption says, "Holy horror of Mrs. McCaffrey in a Washington Street passenger car." Now, Mrs. McCaffrey is the black woman on the right side. Mr. Crafty voted against Negro suffrage. So here you have the depiction of free black people who also are discriminating against this new white intrusion of Irish people. Here again you can see a stereotype of the brutishness and the violence and alcoholism of the Irish immigrant. This is called the day we celebrate, which is St. Patrick's Day, 1867. And the police who are trying to quell this uprising but are being abused at the hands of the Irish mob. Then again, there was another concern about religion. This one is called the American River Gangs. And I don't know if you can tell, but the people coming out of the water look like alligators. In fact, they are papists. So you can see that their hats are actual papal hat that is turned down to the side to look like the opening of an alligator's mouth. And they are coming to attack the Protestant children of public schools, U.S. public schools, within the site of the U.S. Capitol, that the U.S. government was willing to allow Catholic children to come and influence Protestant children within the schooling system.